You're watching Inside Utah Politics.
Time now for a closer look at some of the big stories of the week with the Inside Utah Politics panel. This week we have State Senators Dan McCay and Gene Davis. Gentlemen, great to have you with us. Thanks so much for being here. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Let's start off with a big story within the Unified Police Department. I want to make it very clear, Sheriff Rivera is not saying we need to get rid of body cams.
Yeah. She's
saying we're coming to this crossroads and we need to make a decision on what we need to do. Obviously the funding being the big issue here. Do you think they should continue and find a way to pay for that and continue with that program?
The one true element of government that government should pay for is access to government, right? Having transparency so that, unfortunately, guys like you in the press can see it, but not just the press, but the public. I mean, can you imagine the idea today if the legislature just decided, you know what, the website where you can look at all of our bills and where you can watch public debate and where you can watch and you can see transcripts of discussion, we're going to take all that down. Can you imagine the conversation that would be had as a result of taking that down? Body cameras is an innovative way of working in law enforcement. It's great to have that objective third party watching what's going on. And research shows that it is more helpful to our law enforcement officers than it is any other measure like where it gets them in trouble. And so it just makes so much sense.
Senator Davis, bring you in with your thoughts.
It's really so much of what we do in the legislature and everything. It all comes down to the bottom line, money, and how you're going to pay for it. This is one of the biggest problems that we face in government, is when you have a grants program that all of a sudden the money goes away. Mm-hmm. How do you maintain things when you take it as a grant? That's one of the reasons I've been opposed to grants throughout my entire career.
What about pilot programs?
Well, that's
same thing, right?
Pilot program is nothing more than
that's
a grant
exactly what we
program.
have here is a federal grant that is going to be drying up. You two know all too well because you deal with a budget every single year, and every single year worthwhile projects go by the wayside because there's just not enough money to go around. Mm-hmm. So you say this should be a priority and other things should go if it comes down to that.
Yeah, no question. Government transparency in government is a bill the government and the taxpayers should be willing to pay for.
Okay, any last thoughts?
It's a local issue, and probably the one thing that should be happening is that debate needs to be taking place in the city councils and in the county councils and commissioners around the state of Utah.
Actually, one last question just popped in my mind. Any way the state could end up providing funding for local municipalities for this?
We've had proposals to do that in the past, and I don't think it would be something that we would turn away from. I think the question should be appropriately, do local officials value that level of transparency for their taxpayers? If they do, they really should look at ways to pay for it.
Okay.
And storage, of course, is a number one issue, and that's the costly
cost.
part. Mm-hmm. And it's how long do we store these body camera film or data, and how do we take care of that?
Yeah, that's actually stuff you've set up standards for on the state level. Let's move on to tax reform. It was a big talker for a little bit in the session. The bill came out, business community really came out in full force. Where does it go now? We're going to see the task force come out maybe in the next couple of weeks, maybe first of next month. Where should this discussion move from here?
I think the one thing we need to take a look at all the exemptions we have, and we need to address those. There's one way we could do it, and that is all of the industrial tax exemptions that we've given to corporations that we don't even keep track of. They're paying nothing. If we ask for 50% of that tax, that would help alleviate that problem in a hurry.
Your thoughts on that idea?
Well, you know, it's tough. It's easy to talk about raising rates or changing things or taking exemptions away from corporations. They don't vote, right? Unfortunately, to the minority party's inconvenience, all those tax credits, all those benefits or whatever are actually providing jobs for the state of Utah. And so when you look at the incentives and where they go and what they provide, we're far outpacing our growth with jobs. And it's actually a problem, right? That we have too many jobs available and not enough people to fill them. And so I don't see that being the way to go. I do think looking at balancing, we've seen in the country, we've seen a shift away from product-based economy into a services-based economy. And the primary place that's happening actually is medical care. The average household income and disposable income is being eaten up by medical care costs. And so I don't know how we're going to deal with it. The proposal
In the
from the
first
House
bill,
was,
though, that was exempted.
yeah, and so that's the interesting part, right? Is you put out a bill that everybody is taxed in, and then pretty much everybody
exemptions.
starts, and then exemptions start
Right.
creeping in. So
Your sales tax, that's the question. Do your
But we
sales tax the premium, or do your sales tax the doctor?
yeah,
Who are
And
you going to put the sales tax on to pay for that
And
cost?
what businesses looked at with that bill was they looked at it and said, we're creating a layered tax here.
Yeah.
In other words, the end consumer is going to pay a tax 3 or 4 times by the time they get to the end product.
And that really highlights the problem with what Gene's solution is, which is, do away with the exemptions or whatever it is. Realize successful companies do not pay taxes. They pass on the cost of that tax to their consumer. So if you take away an exemption, or if you change its tax rate or tax it more, all those things are going to be passed on to the consumer. And if that price is hidden in the price of the good, and they could buy that good in Utah or buy that good in Idaho where that isn't taxed, you're going to have a lot of people running to Idaho to buy their products depending on the price differential.
But it's more fair to take and tax the barber, whose his total income is coming from cutting the hair of his clients. Now you're going to put a sales tax on that. Where do you go? Where do you don't escape that tax?
Let me ask you guys this. I'm sure you heard from constituents on the tax bill. The way it was written, HB 441, do you see it being something near that, or are we going to have to go in a completely different direction?
Personally, I think we'll go in a totally evolved direction, right? We all have teenagers, so I can say at the end of the day, I think every bill reflects the life and mood of a teenager at times. I've made this before. But sometimes a bill comes out kicking and screaming and everybody's mad at it, and it's having this terrible breakdown, and then you foster it along and you get the place where it needs to be. I think this bill, where it was at 441, everybody was right to kind of put the brakes on it. Let's take the summer to study it. But I think it really is important. It's the beginning phase. There will be iterations of that bill as we go through the public discourse. I will say, you're talking about taxing legal services and accounting services. I think I now know every attorney and every accountant that lives in my district.
I'm sure you do.
It's been great.
Yep, I'm sure you do.
Not so great.
441,
a final thought on that before we move on to
441,
something else.
I don't think it's a starting point. I think we need to look at everything, throw everything on the table, and have a wide open discussion, as we have in the past. And that's always broken down when you start doing that.
Okay.
It falls apart, and the devil is always in the details, and I don't know how we're going to get there.
All right, we will continue to watch that. I have about a minute left.
Maybe that's
short period of
maybe that's
time.
why you call me details sometimes.
It's the nice way of saying it. A minute left. I want to get to your bill that was vetoed.
Oh.
Is there it dealt with filling congressional vacancies.
Yeah.
Any appetite for trying to override that veto?
I think the bill is good for a lot of reasons.
I would have never thought that.
Yeah. The primary reason is 104 people looked at the bill, and it went through our process, and that's, another element of the process. You got to get 38 votes, you got to get 15 votes in the Senate, and you got to have 1 signature. That's the whole process. I think there is some appetite, but I think even better, let's continue the process. Let's keep, if this isn't it, and we end up not, pushing back on the veto, fine, but we do need a process.
30 seconds left for your
It happens,
thoughts.
not since 1929 until just a few years
Yep,
ago.
there's no
So
urgency.
very seldom does that happen that we've got plenty of time, I think,
Yeah.
to take a look at that. We just have to keep it on the plate.
But it's like that
And
old,
moving it in that direction.
It's like that age-old adage, though. When is the best time to plant a tree? 20 years ago. When is the next best time to plant a tree? Today, right? And so we're going to constantly be stuck without trees.
But remember, the legislature, it's always tomorrow, because we only
Yeah, that's
react,
true.
we don't proact.
That's a good point.
All right, we will end it on that. Gentlemen, thanks so much for being here. Great conversation this morning. Stay with us. We'll be right back with more Inside Utah Politics right after the break.